The town of Larkspur Ridge weren't on many maps, and that's how most folks liked it. Just a cluster of buildings huddled round a dusty main street, framed by cottonwoods and the sharp scent of sage. It was the kind of place folks came to forget past sins, bad debts, lost names. Cate Monroe had lived there her whole life. She'd been born in the back of Doc Halford's clinic, raised in a one-room shack behind the old church, and now ran the telegraph office 6 days a week. She was known as the quiet type, polite, dependable, but underneath that calm voice and steady hands, her heart beat with a hollowness she couldn't explain. Love? That was for other folks. Folks who hadn't been left behind too many times. Then he rode in. The stranger came just after a late summer storm, the kind that rolls in fast, rattles the windows, and leaves the air heavy with the smell of dust and rain. He didn't come on the stagecoach, didn't ride in with no posse, just showed up on foot, hat pulled low, boots caked with mud, a rifle slung across his back like he hadn't set it down in years. Didn't say a word. Cate saw him first from the window of the telegraph office, leaning against the fence across the street, watching the town like it was a place he used to know. He stood there long enough that old man Duffy wandered by to ask his business. Got nothing for an answer but a tip of the hat. That's when folks started whispering. By sundown, he'd taken a room upstairs at Miss Daly's boarding house and hadn't spoken more than a handful of words. He wasn't rude, just quiet, like someone who'd seen too much and was still sorting through the wreckage. Cate hadn't thought much of him, not at first. She'd seen all kinds pass through Larkspur Ridge, cowhands, preachers, bounty men. But there was something in the way he looked at her that stuck like a burr. Not like he wanted something. Not like he pitied her. Just saw her. Like he knew what it felt like to be alone in a room full of people. 3 days passed before she learned his name. Not from his mouth, but from a telegram he sent. A single line to a marshal in Arizona. Calder arrived Larkspur. Staying put. For now. Calder. That's all she had. No past, no purpose. Just a name and a silence that wrapped round him like an old coat. But when trouble came knocking, and it always did in a town like Larkspur Ridge, he stepped out of the shadows and into her life in a way that would change her forever. And that's when she started to learn what love really felt like. Not a flutter in the chest or a stolen kiss under the stars, but the kind of steady, unspoken strength that wraps round you when the world falls apart. The kind a silent cowboy carries like a promise. Cate Monroe had a habit of keeping things in their place, ledgers balanced, telegrams logged, coffee brewed at precisely 6. She reckoned if she could keep her little corner of the world in order, maybe the chaos that lived in her memories wouldn't come calling. But that stranger, Calder, he didn't fit anywhere. Every day for a week he wandered through Larkspur Ridge, never speaking more than necessary. Mornings he'd be down by the creek, staring at the water like it held the answers he'd misplaced. Afternoons he'd sit outside the general store, whittling at some scrap of pine with the same kind of focus she used to sew her mother's quilts. And every evening, just before the sun dropped behind the ridge, he'd walk past her window, always quiet, always looking straight ahead. But once, just once, he glanced her way. Just a flicker. That one glance kept her up all night. Then came the 4th Tuesday of the month, when the saloon threw open its doors for music and poker. Cate usually avoided it, too loud, too full of men with whiskey breath and stories that all ended in gunfire. But that night, something made her go. She sat near the back, her best shawl draped around her shoulders, sipping watered-down cider. The saloon was alive with fiddle strings and laughter sharp enough to cut glass. She was thinking about slipping out unnoticed when she saw him, Calder, standing just inside the doorway, hat in hand, eyes sweeping the room like he was cataloging ghosts. He didn't move until he spotted her. Then, slow as a drawn breath, he walked across the room, boots thumping gentle against the wood. Folks watched, their talk tap-airing off like a fire going out. No one knew what he was about, but they knew better than to interrupt a man who moved like a storm cloud. He stopped beside her table, nodded once, and asked the first real question she'd heard from him. "Mind if I sit?" Cate blinked, caught between breath and surprise. "It's your town same as mine," she said, nudging out the chair with her toe. He sat. They didn't speak for a long while. Just listened to the fiddle, the laughter, the clink of coin on wood. And then, quiet like, he said, "Didn't expect a place like this to still have music." Cate looked at him then, really looked. There was a scar just under his chin, like a blade had come too close once. His hands were rough, but his eyes, Lord, those eyes, weren't nothing hurried in them. Just patience and pain and a kind of tired that ran bone deep. "This town's full of surprises," she said, "even for folks who ain't looking." He didn't smile, but something in his shoulders eased. They sat that way, till the music died down and the room grew quieter. He stood, nodded again, and left without another word. Cate didn't sleep much that night. Come morning, she found a scrap of pine sitting on her windowsill, carved into the shape of a sparrow. Rough around the edges, but careful, delicate even. And that's when she knew Calder wasn't just passing through. He was waiting. For what? She didn't yet know. But whatever it was, she felt it stirring in her chest like the first whisper of spring. The morning after Calder left that carved sparrow, Larkspur Ridge felt different. The breeze carried more bite than usual, and the townsfolk talked in hushed tones, glancing over shoulders like trouble had its boots on and was fixin' to walk through town. Cate kept the sparrow in her pocket, fingers brushing over the grain whenever doubt crept in. She didn't know what it meant exactly, just that it was meant for her, and that was enough to carry her through a day. She didn't see Calder that morning. Not by the creek, not near the store. By noon, whispers started stirring. Sheriff Harper had ridden out early. Word was, heading toward Baird Canyon. Something about tracks spotted near the old mining trail. Cate tried not to listen, but by mid-afternoon, the quiet inside the telegraph office grew too loud to bear. She stood, tossed her shawl over her shoulders, and headed up toward Miss Daly's boarding house. She found Calder out back, shirt sleeves rolled up, mending a busted rail fence like it was the only thing holding the world together. "You didn't come by the post today," she said. He looked up, wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "Didn't reckon there'd be a message worth hearing." Cate tilted her head. "You always mend fences when you're waiting on bad news." Calder paused, then shrugged. "Helps keep the hands from wandering back to the past." Silence fell between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Finally, Cate asked the question that had been itching at her chest since the day he arrived. "You running from something, Calder?" He didn't flinch, didn't deny it, just leaned against the post and looked off toward the hills, where the late sun burned like a brand across the sky. "Used to ride with the Sand Mesa Patrol," he said. "Tracked outlaws. Shot more than I care to count. Then one day we brought in a boy. 17. Scared. Didn't even have a real pistol. Just his daddy's old flintlock. Orders were to hang him." Cate's breath caught. "I didn't do it," Calder continued. "But I didn't stop it neither. Watched while he swung. Watched his ma scream herself hoarse." Cate stepped closer, voice low. "And you think fixin' fences makes up for that?" "No," he said, and his voice cracked like old leather. "But it keeps me from forgetting." Cate didn't say a word. She just reached into her pocket, pulled out the sparrow, and set it on the fence rail. "You ever think," she said, "that maybe you were meant to carry something more than guilt?" Calder stared at that little wooden bird like it might take flight. That evening, just as the sun kissed the earth, Sheriff Harper rode back into town, coat torn, hat gone, blood in his beard. He collapsed right there outside the saloon, and every soul in Larkspur Ridge came running. Cate pushed through the crowd, just in time to hear him rasp 2 words. Bart Cutter. A name Cate hadn't heard in nearly 10 years. A name that turned her blood cold. And when she looked at Calder, she saw it in his eyes. He knew that name too. Bart Cutter. Cate hadn't heard that name since she was 15 years old and hid under the floorboards of the mission house while gunfire tore through the streets of East Hollow. Cutter's gang had come through like a wildfire, robbed the bank, burned the church, and shot anyone who didn't move fast enough. Cate's father hadn't moved fast enough. He was the preacher in East Hollow, the only man who ever told Bart Cutter he'd burn for what he'd done. They found his body behind the church steps, hands still folded in prayer. Cate had stopped praying that day. Now here was his name again, dragged back into her life on a trail of blood and ash. Sheriff Harper was laid up in Doc Halford's, too weak to speak more than a few slurred warnings. But he'd said enough. Bart Cutter was heading west again, and this time he was bringing fire with him. Most folks in Larkspur Ridge figured it was just another outlaw passing through. But Cate knew better. Cutter wasn't a man who passed through. He was a man who claimed places, left scars so deep the land remembered. She stood outside the telegraph office that night, staring out at the main street. The lamplights flickered. The wind stirred dust devils down the alleyway, and the whole town felt like it was holding its breath. Then she heard the boots. Heavy, even, certain. Calder. He stopped beside her, looked out over the quiet town, didn't speak for a long spell. "You knew him," she said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. "Road scout while he led the Cutter boys. Back before I knew what kind of devil I was riding with." "You left him." "I tried," Calder said. "But you don't leave Bart Cutter. You disappear or you die." Cate swallowed. Her throat felt thick. "Then why are you here?" He looked at her then, real slow. "Because he don't know I'm still breathing. And if he finds this place, if he finds you, you'll stop him." His jaw tightened. "I'll bury him." For the first time, Cate saw it in him. Not just the quiet sorrow, but the fire behind it. The kind of fire that could burn through a man like Bart Cutter if it ever got loose. "I'll help," she said, surprising even herself. Calder's brow lifted. "You." Cate straightened her shoulders. "I may not have a gun, but I know how he thinks. I know where he camps, and I remember every name he ever took from me." Calder didn't argue, just nodded once, and with that, the silence between them turned to understanding. That night, the two of them sat in the old jailhouse, dusty maps spread out, rifles cleaned, plans whispered like prayers. No one else knew what was coming. Not yet, but Bart Cutter was riding west with murder in his eyes, and for the first time in years, Cate Monroe wasn't running from the past. She was riding straight into it. They left Larkspur Ridge at first light. No farewell, no fuss. Just a saddle creaking under Calder's weight, and Cate holding tight to the reins of a borrowed mare. She'd packed light. A change of clothes, a flask of coffee, a well-worn Bible she didn't read anymore, and a photograph of her father, edges soft from too much touching. Calder didn't ask what was in her bag. She didn't ask what was in his eyes. They followed the ridge trail east, toward the broken gulch and the scorched remnants of an old stage stop where Bart Cutter was last seen. It was quiet land, wind-scoured and bitter, the kind that forgot your name if you didn't say it often. Cate hadn't ridden this far from home in years. Her legs ached, her fingers numbed from the morning chill. But she didn't complain. She watched Calder ride, silent, focused, one hand always near his rifle, eyes flicking to every ridge and canyon like he could smell danger before it took shape. "How long you think we've got?" she asked as they rode single file along a narrow switchback. 2 days, maybe less. That all the time it takes to bring hell back? He didn't answer right away. Just tipped his hat against the sun. Cutter don't travel for fun. If he's moving, it's for blood. They camped that night under a crooked pine, fire low and smokeless. Cate couldn't sleep. The stars blinked above like watchful eyes, and every creak in the dark set her heart to racing. She turned to Calder, who sat by the fire, leaning against a log with one boot resting on the other. "Were you there when East Hollow fell?" He didn't speak at first. Then, without meeting her eyes, he said, "I was in the next town over. Came in after." Cate's voice was barely a whisper. "My father, he didn't fight. He just stood there. Told them he wouldn't leave the church. Thought maybe they'd show mercy." Calder turned his head, slow and heavy. "Cutter don't know mercy, but he knows fear. That's what he spreads. That's why we have to stop him before he sets his boots in Larkspur." Cate looked down at her hands, curled in her lap. "I never thought I'd feel brave again." "You ain't got to be brave," Calder said, voice low and rough. "Just don't run." Cate looked at him then, the firelight dancing in his eyes, and for the first time, she saw something in him that matched what she'd been missing in herself. Grit born from sorrow, strength built from broken things. She didn't speak again, just laid her head on her saddle and let the fire keep watch. The next morning, the world turned red with dawn, and the wind carried a scent Cate hadn't smelled in years: gunpowder, smoke, and the sour tang of sweat-soaked canvas. Calder rose slow, sniffed the air, and muttered, "He's close." They mounted fast and rode harder. Dust kicked up in their wake, like a war drum rolling toward a reckoning. By midday, they reached the gulch, and what they saw made Cate's blood run colder than a mountain stream. A camp, 3 wagons, half a dozen horses, men lounging near the fire, guns close, eyes sharper than broken glass, and at the center, sitting like a king on a crate of dynamite, Bart Cutter, older, grayer, but still wearing that same wicked grin Cate remembered. He leaned back in his chair, logging at something cruel, while a boy, no more than 14, cleaned his boots. Calder lowered his spyglass, face like stone. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. Cate reached into her coat and pulled out her father's silver cross. She looked at it once, then slipped it into her pocket. "I've been ready for 10 years. The plan wasn't fancy. They'd wait till sundown. Calder would draw 'em out, one by one, quiet and clean. Cate would circle down the east slope, find the boy, and get him away from that campfire of devils. After that, well, Calder didn't make promises about what came next. "Cutter's too smart to spook easy," Calder said, checking the load on his rifle. "He'll send others ahead, watching. But he won't expect you." Cate nodded. "He never did before." They split just as the sky turned copper, and the shadows stretched long like they were reaching for the past. Cate's breath caught as she crawled low through the chaparral. Each step brought back memories she'd locked away like letters in a drawer she'd sworn never to open. But she kept going. She found the boy sitting alone near a bedroll, staring into the coals. He looked worn thin by travel, eyes too old for his face. "Hey," she whispered, crouching beside him. He jumped, hand going for the knife at his belt. She raised her hand slow. "I ain't gonna hurt you, but you need to come with me now." He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the wagons. "Cutter'll kill me." "No," Cate said. "He won't." A sound cracked through the gulch, sharp, hollow. A gunshot. Cate spun, heart slamming against her ribs. Then another shot, and a scream. "Calder." She grabbed the boy's arm. "Run." They scrambled up the gulch wall, half crawling, half sliding through the grit. Shots rang out behind them, but no bullets found home. When they reached the top, Cate shoved the boy toward the trees. "Keep going. Ride west. Don't stop till you see the river." "But what about you?" She didn't answer, just turned and ran back toward the smoke. Calder was bleeding. Not bad, but enough to make the world tilt a little when he stood. He'd taken out 2 of Cutter's men already, both lying still as shadows in the dirt. Another was groaning near the fire, a bullet in his leg. Then Cutter stepped out from the smoke. He wore a duster coat, long and dusty, a Colt in each hand. The years had carved deep into his face, but the grin, that same crooked grin Cate remembered from East Hollow, was right where it always was. "Well," Cutter said, "look what the buzzards dragged in." Calder straightened, wiping the blood from his brow. "We ain't buzzards, Bart. We're ghosts." Cutter laughed. "That right? You come back from the dead, just to bleed on my boots." Cate stepped into the clearing then, rifle raised. Cutter turned, blinking, like he'd seen a ghost in truth. "Monroe." She didn't speak. Didn't have to. The fire popped between them. Silence thick as molasses. Then Cutter's grin faltered. "You got no call standing there pointing iron at me. I spared you once." Cate's voice came steady as thunder. "And I've regretted surviving every day since." The wind picked up, kicking dust into the fire. Cutter turned his pistol toward Calder. Cate fired. The shot cracked the stillness in half. Cutter staggered, hand clap pinned to his shoulder. Not dead, but wounded. "You always were a coward," Cate said, taking a step closer, picking on folks who couldn't fight back. Cutter spat blood, sneering. "You gonna finish it?" Calder's hand found Cate's shoulder. "You don't need to." She looked at him, eyes burning. "Yes, I do. But she didn't shoot again. She lowered the rifle, turned her back, and walked away. "Let the vultures have him," she said. "He's already dead." Back in Larkspur Ridge, the town gathered in silence when the two riders returned, Cate lead in, Calder following, dust on their coats and a weariness in their bones that words couldn't reach. And that night, beneath a sky clear as glass, Calder finally spoke what Cate had felt since the day he arrived. "You saved me out there." Cate looked up at him, her voice a whisper. "No, you saved me." It took 3 days for Larkspur Ridge to stop talking. 3 days of whispers passed over wash basins, in barbershops, behind lace curtains. Cate Monroe riding out with a killer and coming back with a scarred-up drifter and no lawman in sight? That sort of thing stuck in a town's throat. But Cate didn't flinch. Not once. She opened the telegraph office at sunrise like she always did, brewed strong coffee, answered wires, even smiled now and then, though it never quite reached her eyes. Calder stayed at Miss Daly's, spent his mornings fixing her porch rail, his afternoons quiet as snowfall. He didn't walk past Cate's window anymore. He walked to it, and every time she looked up and saw him standing there, hat in hand, eyes steady as river stones, something inside her that had been waiting too long finally started to believe. But believe ain't the same as knowing. One evening, she found him sitting behind the church, same place her father used to stand after Sunday sermons, staring off into the wheat fields beyond. "I thought maybe you'd be gone by now," she said, stepping into the shade. "Thought about it," he said. She sat beside him, close enough their shoulders nearly touched. The wind rustled dry leaves at their boots. "You afraid?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Not of guns. Not of Cutter's men. I'm afraid of staying somewhere I might belong and finding out I don't." Cate's throat tightened. "You ever wonder," she said, "what love feels like?" Calder turned to her, real slow. "Every day. I thought it was something loud," she said. "Something that lit fires and made your chest ache. But it ain't. Not really." "No." She shook her head, voice soft as the breeze. "It's quiet. It's someone carrying your burden without a skin. It's knowing you ain't alone, even when nothing's said." He looked down at her hand where it rested on her knee, fingers curled like she wasn't sure if they ought to reach or stay still. So he reached first, took her hand like it was something precious, held it like a man who'd never been trusted with anything that didn't come with blood on it. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Then, at last, Cate leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered, "Don't leave." And that silent cowboy, the one who'd carried more ghosts than he'd ever buried, just nodded once. "I won't." Summer rolled slow across Larkspur Ridge, laying gold over the hills and stirring the air with warmth that clung to your bones. Cate Monroe had started sleeping easier. Not deep, never deep, but the kind of rest that came with feeling safe for the first time in a long while. Calder came most evenings, just before the sky turned copper. He'd bring things, fresh-picked berries, hand-carved trinkets, once even a battered book of poetry with the spine held together by a string of rawhide. They didn't always talk. Most nights they didn't need to. But even with peace at her doorstep, Cate felt a tension building, like the air before a thunderstorm, the kind of stillness that didn't last. And sure enough, it came knocking. It was late afternoon when the first rider arrived, dusty, unshaven, mean-looking in that way that didn't need words. He tied his horse outside the saloon and walked like a man who'd left too many fires behind him. By sundown, there were 3 more, hard-eyed men with tight lips and twitching fingers. Word came quick. They weren't just wanderers. They were looking for someone, a man with a scar on his shoulder and a reputation for disappearing. Cate watched them from the telegraph window, heart hammering in her chest. Calder hadn't come that night, hadn't shown at all, and that silence, where once there'd been comfort, now felt like a hole opening beneath her feet. She waited till the street emptied, then locked the office and walked the length of town to Miss Daly's. His room was empty. No bedroll, no saddle, no boots by the door. Only a note, folded once, scrawled in his careful hand. "Didn't want to bring this to your doorstep. Be back when it's done. Calder. Cate stared at the page, so long her fingers went numb. Then she folded it, tucked it under her dress, and turned for home. But she didn't cry. She didn't sit still either. Next morning, she packed a satchel, left a note for the sheriff. Gone east. Don't follow. And she rode. She followed the old trails, the ones Calder had once mapped out with his finger on the porch rail, describing where the land cut sharp and the water ran cold. She followed his boots like they were carved into the land itself. And after 2 days, she found him, bloodied, bruised, sitting by a dry creek bed, one arm hanging limp at his side. He looked up as she approached, eyes tired but alive. "Cate," he rasped. She didn't answer, just dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms round him. "You fool," she whispered. "Don't you know I don't care what you done?" Calder winced as her touch met the bruise on his ribs. "Didn't want you caught in it." "Well," she said, pulling a flask from her bag and pressing it to his lips. "Too late for that." He drank slow, then leaned back against a rock, wincing. "They're gone," he said. "All 3. Ain't coming back." Cate looked at him, really looked. "You ain't alone anymore, Calder. You hear me?" He met her gaze. "I hear you." And somewhere between the rustle of the leaves and the sigh of the wind, the last bit of space between vanished. Calder didn't ride fast on the way back to Larkspur Ridge. He rode steady. One arm still hung limp from the bullet that grazed his shoulder, and every jolt of the saddle sent lightning through his ribs. But Cate was beside him, and that was enough. She didn't press him with questions, didn't ask for details about the fight or the men who wouldn't be following anymore. She just stayed close, her presence like a steady fire in a cold room. They reached the edge of town at dusk, where the cottonwoods rustled soft, and the sky bled orange behind the hills. Folks watched them ride in, quiet, wary. But no one spoke. They saw Calder's wounds, Cate's dust-stained face, and the way their hands brushed once as they dismounted. And they understood. Miss Daly had already straightened Calder's room. Cate stayed with him that first night, sitting in the rocker while he slept fitful beneath the quilts. She read aloud from that old book of poetry he'd brought her once, low and slow, like a lullaby made of words. Come morning, she cooked. Bacon crisped in the pan, biscuits browned in the oven, and for the first time in years, Cate hummed while she worked. Not for show, not to fill silence, just because her heart was full. Calder sat at the kitchen table, shirtless and bruised, watching her with a look that said he still didn't quite believe this wasn't some fever dream. "You always sing when you cook?" he asked. Cate glanced over her shoulder, smiling. "Only when I know someone's listening." He nodded. "I like it." After breakfast, he walked with her to the telegraph office, slow, limping, but upright. The town watched again, but this time the stares didn't bite. They nodded, tipped hats, even smiled a little. Word had gotten round. Cate and Calder weren't just two loners anymore. There was something more. By week's end, he'd mended the porch rail at her place, repaired the shutters, hung a horseshoe above the door, silent cowboy's way of saying he meant to stay. One evening, she found him standing in her kitchen, staring at the pot of coffee on the stove. "You planning to drink that or interrogate it?" she teased. He turned, held up a small tin box. Inside it a ring. Simple. Silver. Worn from the years it had spent in his saddlebag. "Was gonna ask you weeks ago," he said. "But I kept waiting for the right time." Cate blinked. Her throat tightened. "It's now," she whispered. Calder slipped the ring on her finger, his hand still rough, still scarred, but gentle as falling snow. And that night, as the wind swept across the ridge and the fire crackled low, Cate Monroe, who once didn't know what love felt like, lay curled in the arms of a man who didn't need to speak it. He just was it. The seasons rolled on through Larkspur Ridge, as they always had, dusty summers, brittle falls, winters sharp enough to make a man think twice before breathing too deep. But that winter, the wind didn't howl so mean. Not with Cate Monroe and Calder on the hill. Their home was small, 2 rooms, 1 chimney, and a porch that creaked like it had something to say. But it was warm, and full of little things that made it theirs. a carved sparrow sitting on the windowsill. Calder's hat always hanging by the door. Cate's baking tin blackened with years of use, but never once empty. Folks stopped whispering long ago. Now they just nodded when Cate passed by with a basket on her hip or when Calder helped mend the fence round the schoolhouse. They weren't the kind of couple that made a fuss, but when they walked into the room together, the air felt different, settled. Right. Calder still didn't talk much. Didn't have to. Cate could read him better than a telegram. Knew when he needed space. Knew when his past came calling in the dead of night and left him staring at the ceiling till the fire burned low. And Calder, he learned to let her speak, let her dream, let her take up space like no one ever had before. She once asked him what made him stay. He'd been whittling by the fire, a new sparrow taquine shape in his hands. He looked at her with that slow, sure gaze and said, "'Cause this is the first place that ever felt like it wouldn't turn me out." Cate smiled, leaned her head on his shoulder, and whispered, "You were never meant to be turned away." In the spring, they built a garden. In the summer, they danced once in the barn, just the two of them, with fiddle music coming from an old phonograph Calder found in trade. And come the next fall, the town gathered at the church to see them stand before the altar. Cate in a dress the color of mourning, Calder in a coat she'd sewn herself, hands trembling just enough to give his quiet away. The preacher spoke soft and slow. When he asked if Calder took this woman, he didn't say yes. He just looked at her, and she nodded. That was enough. They didn't ride off into the sunset. No, they built one. Plank by plank, day by day. Love like theirs didn't need fireworks. It just needed time. And in that quiet corner of the West, beneath skies too wide to measure, Cate Monroe finally knew what love felt like. It was worn boots by the door, warm coffee shared in silence, and a cowboy's arms wrapped round her when the world grew too loud.